My name is Kaelen Vane. I'm 32 years old, a federal fraud investigator for the Eastern District in Boston. My entire career is built on the reality that numbers do not have an agenda. They don't hold grudges, they don't tell white lies to spare your feelings, and they never, ever forget. For a decade, I've spent my days dismantling complex financial webs, finding the truth hidden in the margins of other people's ledgers. But as I stood in the center of a high-end bridal boutique on Newbury Street, I realized I had spent my life auditing everyone except the people who gave me my name. Mom's call lit up my screen just as the world started to tilt. I remember the exact smell of that afternoon. Expensive lavender and the sterile, metallic scent of a brand new credit card. I pleaded with her, my voice low and steady. "It's my wedding, Mom. I just need the secondary account cleared for the final payment." Her response wasn't a scream. It was a hiss, cold and sharp as a scalpel. "I'm not coming, Kaelen. I won't let you destroy this family by marrying a black man." Then the line went dead. I had been disowned in the time it took for a traffic light to change. 3 days later, I would receive a seizure notice for a fraud debt that was older than my career. In court, she would finally learn who my husband really was. But before I tell you how a lifetime of silence turned into a federal case, please take a moment to connect with this story. If these words resonate with you, like and subscribe to the channel. I'd love to know where you're listening from and what time it is in your corner of the world. Let's go back to that Tuesday at 3:15 p.m., the moment the first domino fell. The boutique was one of those places where the carpets are so thick they swallow the sound of your footsteps, and the air feels like it's been filtered through silk. I was there to pick up my gown, a custom $8,500 A-line piece that made me feel like I actually belonged in my own life. I've never been the perfect daughter. I'm not tall like my sister Valora or polished like my mother Myra. I'm the sturdy one, the one who studied while they shopped. The one who worked double shifts at the bureau so I could fund the family emergencies that seemed to happen every time Myra saw a new collection in Paris. I handed my card to the clerk. She was young, maybe 22, with a smile that hadn't yet been worn down by the demands of Newbury Street. She swiped it. A sharp, digital beep echoed in the quiet room. "I'm sorry, Miss Vane," she murmured, her face flushing. "It's been declined." I didn't panic. I'm a fraud investigator. I deal with glitches for a living. I handed her my backup card, the one linked to the family's emergency fund, an account I had personally padded with $30,000 over the last 2 years. "Try this one." Beep. Declined. I felt a strange prickle at the back of my neck. I pulled out my phone to call the bank, but before I could dial, the heavy velvet curtain of the VIP lounge at the back of the store slid open. Myra and Valora stepped out. Valora looked like a dream. She was preening in front of a three-way mirror, a Betten gray Hermes Birkin bag slung over her arm. Myra followed her, adjusting the strap with the kind of reverence she had never shown me. The bag was a $25,000 statement piece. "Don't bother with the cards, Kaelen," Myra said. Her voice was smooth, aristocratic, and completely devoid of warmth. She didn't even look at me. She was busy admiring the way the leather matched Valora's eyes. "I emptied the limit this morning. Valora needed a piece for the gala tonight. Your sister is the face of this family, and a Vane does not attend a high society event with last season's accessories." I looked at the Birkin bag, the bag that cost nearly 3 times my wedding dress. I looked at Myra. That was my wedding fund, Mom. That was money I earned. Myra finally turned to me. She looked at my charcoal suit, my practical shoes, and the exhaustion I couldn't quite hide. "Consider it an upbringing fee," she whispered, leaning in close enough that I could smell her Chanel No. 5. "You've always been the sturdy one, Kaelen. You don't need a dress this expensive to prove you're marrying, well, him. I won't let you destroy our image by parading a black man down the aisle of a church our ancestors built. If the card declined, consider it a sign from above. You don't belong in white lace." The clerk stood frozen, her eyes darting between us. I could see the pity in her gaze, and for a second, the old Kaelen, the girl who just wanted to be seen, felt the heat rise in her throat. But I am a Vane, and more importantly, I am an investigator. I've learned that when you're being attacked, The best thing you can do is gather the data. I see, I said. My voice was a flatline. I turned to the clerk. Cancel the order. I won't be needing the dress. Kaelen, don't be dramatic, Valora chimed in, stroking the Birkin bag. You've always been so sensitive. I didn't answer her. I walked out of the boutique and into the crisp, biting air of Boston. My hands weren't shaking. They were steady, professional-grade steady. I sat in my car, a 2022 Volvo that was paid for and reliable, and opened my banking app. With 4 deliberate taps, I began the audit. I deauthorized Myra's access to my primary accounts. I froze the supplemental credit lines I had opened in my name for family use. I closed the family legacy escrow account I had been feeding since I passed the bar. I felt the weight of 30 years beginning to lift. It wasn't an act of revenge. It was an act of accounting. A piece of rejected plastic had just told me the truth my heart had spent a lifetime trying to redact. I wasn't a daughter to them. I was an unsecured loan with a high tolerance for neglect. I realized that for years, I hadn't been a part of this family. I had been its benefactor, and they had mistaken my kindness for a lack of sight. As I sat there, watching the wealthy shoppers of Newbury Street pass by, my phone lit up. It was Stellan. He was likely calling to ask about the dress, to tell me he loved me, to be the anchor he had always been since the day we met at the bureau. I didn't answer. I wasn't ready to talk to him yet, because I knew that once I spoke the truth out loud, there would be no going back. The woman who walked into that boutique was a daughter trying to buy her way into a family that didn't want her. The woman who drove away was an investigator who had just found the first lead in a very long, very dark trail. Now, let me take you back to the autumn of 2014 in Back Bay, Boston. The air tasted like damp brick and wood smoke, and the sunset over the Charles River always felt like a painting that was trying too hard. Our family home was a 3-story Victorian on a cobblestone street, a house that looked magnificent from the sidewalk but was rotting quietly behind the drywall. That house was the physical manifestation of the Vane legacy, a grand exterior maintained by a series of hidden, frantic repairs that no one was allowed to talk about. The incident at the boutique on Newbury Street didn't happen in a vacuum. It wasn't a sudden lapse in my mother's judgment or a momentary surge in my sister's greed. It was the natural conclusion of a system that had been functioning with mechanical precision for over 20 years. In our house, love wasn't a steady current. It was a ranking system based on how much light you reflected onto my mother. Image wasn't just a priority. It was the only law. We were a family of silhouettes, defined entirely by the expectations of the woman who held the flashlight. Myra, my mother, was the architect of appearances. She walked with a poise that felt like a challenge, her every word curated to ensure that the Vane name remained synonymous with old money and effortless grace, even as the bank accounts began to whisper otherwise. My father, Oswald, was a man who lived in the silence between Myra's demands. He was a retired consultant who had traded his spine for a quiet life, moving through the house like a ghost who had forgotten he was dead. Then there was Valora. My sister was the brand. From the time she could walk, she was treated as something luminous, fragile, and essential. Myra viewed her like a priceless Ming vase, beautiful to look at, but too delicate to ever be expected to hold water. I, on the other hand, was the scapegoat. I was described in backhanded compliments, sturdy, invisible, and functional. I was the safety net that no one noticed until it was strained to the breaking point. Valora was the dream my parents wanted to live. I was the maintenance crew required to keep that dream from collapsing. She was celebrated. I was managed. I remember my graduation from Northeastern. I was finishing a dual degree in criminal justice and finance, a path I'd chosen because I wanted to understand the mechanics of the world, the things that actually held weight. The ceremony was at 10 a.m. I stood in the heat with 2,000 other students, my eyes scanning the crowd for my parents' faces. They arrived 40 minutes late, missing the moment I walked across the stage and shook the dean's hand. When they finally found me afterward, Myra didn't ask to see my diploma. She was busy reapplying her lipstick and complaining about the humidity. Valora had a fashion emergency, Myra said, not looking at me. Her heel snapped right as we were leaving for a social media shoot at the public garden. We had to wait for the cobbler to do a rush job. "I graduated with honors, Mom," I said, holding the leather-bound folder. She patted my cheek without making eye contact. "It's just a piece of paper, Kaelen. Your sister's career depends on her being seen at the right events. You've always been so self-sufficient. You didn't really need us here for the boring part, did you?" I swallowed the lump in my throat and nodded. I told myself it made sense. Valora was fragile. Her success was a house of cards that needed constant guarding. I was the sturdy one. I could handle the heat. I could handle being invisible. A year later, I moved into my first studio apartment. It was a 400-square-foot walk-up in Southie that smelled like old radiator steam and ambition. I had asked my father if he could help me move the heavy furniture. He'd promised he'd be there at noon. At 1 p.m., I called him. "I can't make it, honey," Oswald whispered into the phone. I could hear Valora's voice in the background, demanding help with curating her closet for a resale app. "Your mother needs me here to help your sister organize her vintage collection. It's a big launch for her brand. You're strong, Kaelen. You've always had more muscle than your sister. You'll figure it out." I carried the sofa up 3 flights of stairs by myself. My back screamed, and my palms were raw from the friction of the fabric. But as I sat on the floor of my empty apartment that night, eating lukewarm takeout, I didn't feel angry. I felt a twisted sense of pride. I was the one who could survive. I was the one who didn't need help. I mistook my parents' neglect for a badge of strength. I rationalized that Valora needed them more because she was sensitive, while I was the architect of my own life. I didn't realize that by proving I could handle everything, I was simply volunteering to carry everyone else's burdens too. I was being trained. Not to be a daughter, but to be a utility. The first time the emotional favoritism turned into something tangible was a Tuesday evening in November. Myra invited me over for tea, a rare invitation that didn't involve a chore. She sat me down in the sunroom, her voice softer than usual, her eyes lingering on my face with a warmth I had been starving for. "Kaelen," she said, placing her hand over mine. "We're so proud of the way you've handled your career at the Bureau. You're the only Vane who truly understands the complexities of the system. I need a small favor, just for the family's estate planning. I need your social security number and a few digital signatures for some tax filings. It's a way to ensure the Back Bay house stays in the family. You're the sturdy foundation we all rely on." I gave her the information without a second thought. I felt like I was finally being brought into the inner circle. I thought I was earning my place at the table by paying for the chairs. I didn't realize then that the favoritism wasn't just emotional. It was a calculated business model designed to turn my competence into their currency. And the audit was already coming for me. I know now that a sudden thaw in a frozen relationship usually means someone is looking for a leak. But at the time, sitting in a sun-drenched bistro in Back Bay, I just thought the sun had finally come out. The air in the cafe smelled of expensive espresso and warmed cream, a soft acoustic track playing just low enough to feel like a private conversation. Across from me, Myra looked radiant. She had started calling me every Sunday, sending little heart emojis with texts asking if I'd slept well. It was a temperature swing so jarring I should have felt the frostbite, but I was too busy basking in the light. Myra reached across the marble table and patted my hand. "You look so professional, Kaelen. That promotion to senior investigator. I tell everyone at the club. A Vane at the federal level. It carries a certain weight, doesn't it?" I felt that familiar, hollow hunger in my chest begin to fill. For the first time in 30 years, I wasn't the sturdy one who was managed. I was the daughter who was seen. I told her everything. I talked about my salary grade, the federal benefits package, and the security clearance that felt like a shield. I didn't realize I wasn't connecting. I was being audited. "And your salary," she murmured, stirring her tea with surgical precision. "Is that public record? Or is it kept discreet?" "I only asked because of the family estate plan. We want to make sure your updated contact info and emergency contacts are in the file." "Just for the records, dear. And your social security number again. The lawyer said the old one on file was blurry." I gave it all to her. I handed over the data points of my life like they were peace offerings. I was so starved for her approval that I didn't see the harvesting. I thought she was building a bridge to me. I didn't know she was just mapping the terrain of my bank account. The first leak happened 3 weeks later. It was a Thursday morning, 8:14 a.m. Myra's name lit up my phone. Her voice was frantic but controlled. That specific high society panic that implies a crisis without losing its accent. Kaelen, there's been a clerical error with the Back Bay House property tax. A massive oversight by the bank. We need $4,200 by Friday morning, or the city hits us with a staggering penalty. It would be a public record, Kaelen. Imagine the talk. She paused, just long enough for me to feel the weight of the Vane reputation on my shoulders. Just this once, Kaelen, she whispered. You're the only one with a head for these things. Valora is in the middle of a massive contract negotiation for her brand. We can't stress her out with these sordid details. Could you bridge us? Only for a month. I felt a surge of adrenaline. I was the savior. I was the one who kept the walls from crumbling while the sensitive sister was protected. I transferred the $4,200 from my savings. My hands didn't run. They were steady. I watched the transaction successful checkmark appear and felt a sense of belonging that was almost intoxicating. But just this once has a way of becoming a permanent fixture. Within 3 months, the bridge hadn't been dismantled. It had been reinforced with steel. The property tax became the monthly maintenance fund. The only for a month became a recurring automatic transfer of $2,500 that Myra insisted was easier for everyone. The escalation didn't jump, it climbed. It was a ladder of entitlement where each rung was taller than the last. First, it was the $2,500 for the house. Then, it was Valora's health insurance. Because, as a federal employee, your group rate is so much better, and it's only fair to help your sister Kaelen. Then came the emergencies. A furnace repair that cost $3,100. A roof leak that required $5,000. I was working 60-hour weeks at the bureau, skipping my own dental appointments and eating leftovers so I could fund a lifestyle I wasn't even invited to share. When I had a flat tire on the I-95 and asked my father if he could Venmo me $50 for a tow until my next paycheck, he didn't answer. 2 hours later, Myra texted, "Dad says you're so resourceful, you'll figure it out. By the way, the gardener's bill is due Monday. Love you." As a fraud investigator, I was trained to look for patterns. I lived in a world where we didn't believe in coincidences. One night, sitting in my dark studio apartment with the blue light of my laptop reflecting in my glasses, I opened an Excel file I'd named family_audit.xlsx. I began to input the numbers. October, $4,200, tax. November, $2,500, maintenance. December, $3,100, furnace. January, $2,500, maintenance, plus $800, Valora's insurance. I scrolled through 36 months of data. The shock total at the bottom of the column sat there like a physical blow to the stomach. $84,650. I had moved nearly $85,000 into a void. I was paying the mortgage, the insurance, and the emergencies for a Victorian house in Back Bay, where my childhood bedroom had been converted into a walk-in closet for Valora's handbags. The final realization came during a rare family dinner. We were using the sterling silver, the candles flickering against the mahogany table I was technically paying for. Myra raised her crystal glass, a vintage Waterford, and looked at the table of relatives. "We are so lucky Kaelen is so sturdy," she said, her smile not reaching her eyes. "She's not a delicate flower like Valora. She doesn't need the pampering. She's the foundation. Every family needs a workhorse to keep things moving while the rest of us pursue the finer things." The table chuckled. I sat there, my spine straight, my face neutral. I swallowed the compliment like a bitter pill that refused to go down. I looked at Valora, who was complaining that the Pinot Noir was a year too young, and then at Myra, who was already checking her phone for her next shopping cart. I crave attention so much that I'm willing to become a ghost in their machine. I'm not building a legacy for my loving family. I'm just handing matches and gasoline to those who plan to destroy my bridge. I closed my laptop. The screen went black, and for a moment, the only thing I could see was my own reflection, pale, tired, and absolutely certain of one thing. The audit was over. I had handed them the keys, the ammo, and every detail of my life. I didn't know it yet, but the reckoning was already at the door, and it was wearing a uniform. October 14th. That was the day the foundation I had spent 30 years building finally turned to dust. It was 10:45 a.m. on a Saturday in Boston, the kind of morning where the air is so crisp it feels like it might shatter if you speak too loud. I was standing in the small vestry of a stone church on Beacon Hill, the smell of white lilies and floor wax thick in the air. I looked at myself in the mirror. White lace, a steady hand, and a silence that felt heavier than the gown. 15 minutes before I was due to walk the aisle, I did the one thing an investigator is trained not to do. I checked the data for an emotional reason. I opened the Vane family group chat. At 10:52 a.m., the little icons for Myra and Oswald shifted. Read. No one was coming. The silence of the room was interrupted by a muffled notification from my voicemail. I pressed the phone to my ear. It was Myra. Her voice wasn't a shout. It was that practiced, aristocratic hiss. Destroying this lineage for a whim, Kaelen. I won't have the Vane name associated with this union. Don't look for us. You've made your bed. Now sleep in it. Almost simultaneously, a notification from Instagram popped up. Valora had posted. It was a sun-drenched photo of her and Myra at a high-end brunch in Back Bay, clinking crystal flutes of mimosa. The caption read, "Choosing peace and family traditions over drama today." When the organ music started, I didn't wait for a father who wasn't there. I walked out alone. The left side of the sanctuary, my side, was a sea of empty, dark wood. 20 rows of pews, polished and vacant, staring back at me like a hollow rib cage. The only sounds were my own breathing and the soft rustle of silk against the stone floor. Stellan was waiting at the altar, his eyes fixed on me with a fierce, protective warmth that was the only thing keeping my knees from buckling. But as I stood there, I realized I hadn't just been forgotten. I had been erased from the ledger. The aftermath of that silence didn't take weeks to arrive. It took 72 hours. Tuesday, 8:02 a.m. The honeymoon was a quiet stay at a cottage in Marblehead, but we had returned to our apartment to pack for a short trip. The world broke apart with a sharp, rhythmic pounding on the front door. It wasn't the knock of a neighbor. It was the heavy, official strike of someone who carried the weight of the government behind them. I opened the door to find a man in a charcoal windbreaker with U.S. Marshal in bold yellow letters across the chest. Deputy Marshal Miller. He had a heavy brass badge clipped to his belt and a stack of papers that smelled of fresh ink and cold bureaucracy. "Kaelen Vane?" he asked, his voice professional and flat. "Or is it Mrs. Stellan now?" "It's Kaelen Vane," I said, my investigator brain overriding the shock. He handed me a manila folder. The top page was a notice of levy and seizure. Case #Fed 2026 8801. My eyes jumped to the bottom line. A judgment for $250,412.18. "This is a seizure of assets," Miller said, looking past me into the apartment. "A federal judgment regarding a series of fraudulent loans originating in 2006. Identity theft. The creditors have been granted a lien on your property and all linked accounts." 2006? I whispered. I was 22 then. I was in college. I didn't own a car, let alone $250,000 in debt. "You have 48 hours to vacate or prove this isn't your debt, Ms. Vane," Miller said. He looked at me, really looked at me, and I saw a flicker of something that wasn't quite pity. He noticed my wedding ring, still shiny and new. He saw the seized stickers he was authorized to place on my door. The mechanism of the betrayal was so clean it was almost beautiful. 2006 was the year Myra asked for my social security number to help with the estate. She hadn't been protecting my future. She had been harvesting my identity to fund Valora's past. I picked up the phone and called Myra. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I spoke as if I were recording a deposition. "Mom, the U.S. Marshals are at my door. There is a $250,000 fraud debt from 2006. You were managing my finances then. I need the bank records and the power of attorney filings. I need them in 2 hours, or I lose everything." The response came as a text message a minute later. I watched the bubbles dance on the screen. Myra. Figure it out, Kaelen. You're the big federal investigator, aren't you? You always bragged about how sturdy you were. Or maybe your new husband can pay it with his culture. He seems the type to have hidden assets. Scene 8:15 a.m. Deputy Marshal Miller was standing close enough to see the screen. He watched the emoji pop up. He watched the timestamp. He saw the face of the woman who had just laughed at my ruin. He didn't say a word, but he reached out and took a photo of the screen with his official device. "I'll give you until Thursday morning," Miller said, handing me his card. "I've seen enough of these cases to know when someone is being used as a shield. I'll log this as a hostile family non-cooperation in the incident report." I didn't break. I went to my office, opened my forensic laptop, and contacted a private records archivist. I authorized a triple rate, $600 an hour, to pull every signature from every bank Myra had ever used in 2006. It was worth every penny. I wasn't just paying for data, I was paying for the nails in a coffin I hadn't realized I was building for myself. As I sat there, the smell of the marshal's fresh ink still lingering in the hallway, I realized the ultimate truth of my family. For 30 years, I thought I was the foundation of the Vane house. I thought I was the one holding it up. But you don't love the foundation. You just expect it to be there, buried in the dirt, while you live in the light above. I wasn't a daughter. I was an unsecured loan they were finally done using. The strangers in uniform had shown me more mercy in 5 minutes than the woman who gave me my name had shown me in 30 years. My family didn't show up for my joy, and they certainly didn't show up for my survival. But they forgot one thing. An investigator knows exactly how to trace a shadow back to the person casting it. Strangers showed up. My family didn't. And that was the only evidence I needed to close the door on the life I used to have. My name is Kaelen Vane. I am 32 years old, a federal fraud investigator, and on this Thursday at 2:14 a.m., I realized that I had finally stopped being a daughter and started being an architect. The room was held together by the cold, electric blue glow of my forensic-grade laptop and the faint, rhythmic hum of the cooling fan. In the hallway, the yellow seizure notice taped to my door was a sliver of neon in the shadows, a physical reminder that the life I had curated was currently under federal lien. The smell of stale coffee and heated toner filled my home office. I reached up and touched the faint purple bruise on my wrist, a souvenir from the tension of the previous days. There were no tears. Myra had taught me that tears were a waste of moisture, and tonight I needed every ounce of clarity I possessed. I looked at the folder on my desktop titled audit_trail_Vane. It was a map of a ghost, a 30-year history of a woman who existed only as a social silhouette. I stared at the screen and felt the pivot happen inside me. It wasn't a snap, it was a settling. A realization that I had spent my entire adult life trying to buy a seat at a table that was built on my own bones. Keep bleeding, or stop the wound. I was done bleeding. I logged into the federal portal using my restricted credentials. As an investigator, I have seen every type of deception, but performing a digital autopsy on my own past required a different kind of stomach. I pulled my credit history from 2006, the year the $250,000 fraud debt began. I watched the digital fingerprints emerge on the screen, cold and undeniable. My social security number had been used to open a massive line of credit at a private bank in Maine where Myra was a silent partner. The address listed on the 2006 debt wasn't my college dormitory. It was a secret vacation rental my mother had kept for years. I tracked the disbursements. Every dollar had a destination. $12,000 for Valora's private school tuition, $8,000 for a modeling portfolio shoot in Milan, $6,000 for a gala dress Myra wore to the symphony. They hadn't just used my name. They had liquidated my future before I even knew I had one. I moved to my banking app. It was time for the dismantling. I didn't feel anger. I felt the clinical satisfaction of a surgeon removing a tumor. I worked through my checklist with a steady hand, ticking off the items as I severed the lifelines. 1 click, cancel the recurring mortgage payment for the Back Bay Victorian house. 2nd click, deauthorize the secondary cardholder, Vane, Myra. 3rd click, freeze the family legacy escrow account, moving the remaining funds into a private, high-security trust. 4th click, Flag the 2006 debt as criminal identity theft on the federal database, attaching the main bank records as Exhibit A. There was no thunder. Just the soft, rhythmic click of a mouse in a silent room. It was the sound of my life finally belonging to me. The weight that had lived in my chest for 15 years didn't vanish, but it shifted. It became something I carried rather than something that crushed me. The door to the office creaked open. Stellan walked in, his footsteps muffled by the carpet. He didn't ask if I was okay. He didn't ask why I was still awake. He simply set a glass of water on the desk and handed me a thick, unmarked manila envelope. He rested his hand on my shoulder, his thumb tracing the line of my neck. I looked up at him, the blue light reflecting in my glasses. "I finally stopped negotiating with people who don't love me," I said. My voice was quiet, but it didn't tremble. Stellan nodded, his expression unreadable but supportive. "Good, because I have the files on the private bank Myra used in Maine. They've been looking for an excuse to audit that branch for a long time." He tapped the envelope. Inside was a nomination, a formal document that suggested my work at the Bureau was being noticed by people far above my current pay grade. It was a legal wall he was helping me build, a shield for the fallout he knew was coming. "Not yet," Stellan said when I reached for the seal. "Let the fallout happen first. You need to see the deck clear before you build the new house." I glanced at the digital clock on my desk. 3:45 a.m. Less than 6 hours until the whole world wakes up. Myra will be going to her country club for lunch on Thursday. She'll pull out her gold card to pay for a round of mimosa cocktails, and for the first time, the system will say no. I knew the money would be scarce long before my daughter died. By noon, my phone would be flooded with crackling voicemails and urgent messages. I wasn't afraid of the noise. I was the one who turned the music off. I thought the silence would be the hardest part of walking away. I was wrong. The hardest part was the quiet, steady waiting for them to realize the ATM was permanently out of service. Life in our new home on Thursday morning was functional, clean, and unnervingly silent. The kitchen was drenched in autumn sunlight, the air smelling of freshly ground coffee and sourdough toast. Stellan sat across from me, his eyes focused on a legal brief, the steam from his mug curling into the light. From the outside, we looked like the picture of stability. But there is a particular type of phantom pain that comes when you excise people who were supposed to be your anchor. Every time I set 2 plates instead of 4, a sharp ache settled behind my ribs, a reminder of the 20 rows of empty pews that had haunted my wedding. The silence was broken at 10:02 a.m. by the vibration of my phone on the granite countertop. It was a text from Oswald, my father. "Kaelen, your mother found out about the accounts. She's not herself. The house is a war zone. Don't come today to get your boxes. It's not safe." I didn't reply. I didn't send an emoji or a plea for peace. I simply stood up and picked up my keys. I am a federal investigator. I don't take orders from people who used my social security number as an unsecured credit line. I've learned that the strongest structures aren't the ones that never crack, but the ones that are built to withstand the truth. I merged onto Storrow Drive at 10:14 a.m., the speedometer needle holding steady at 68 miles per hour. The Boston skyline blurred into a gray and brick streak as I navigated the winding curves along the Charles River. I knew every turn of this road, just as I knew every creak of the Back Bay house. It would take me exactly 12 minutes to reach the foyer of my childhood. I had 4 boxes of my life left in that house, and I wasn't leaving them as collateral for Myra's rage. I pulled up to the curb at 10:26 a.m. The Victorian house looked as grand as ever, but as I stepped onto the porch, I could feel the rot behind the facade. I didn't knock. I used my key for the last time. The foyer smelled of Myra's expensive perfume and the sharp, metallic tang of panic. Myra was standing by the grand mahogany staircase, her face a mask of aristocratic fury I had never seen fully uncurbed until today. Oswald stood in the shadows behind her, his shoulders hunched, looking like a man who had finally realized the floor was disappearing beneath him. "You blocked the cards, Kaelen?" Myra's voice was a low, dangerous hiss. "You would let your sister starve? You'd let this family collapse into the street for a drop of spite because we didn't attend your little ceremony?" I stood my ground, my hands at my sides. The money stopped when the lies did, Myra. I am not an ATM. I am your daughter, though I suspect you've forgotten the difference. I reached into my bag and pulled out a small, faded velvet box. It was my grandfather's pocket watch, the only thing I had asked for when he passed. He was the only Vane who believed that a person's worth was measured in their word, not their bank balance. It was my anchor, the one piece of hope I had left in this family. Myra lunged before I could react. She didn't hit me. She was more surgical than that. She snatched the velvet box from my hand. "You want to be sturdy, Kaelen Vane?" She spat, her eyes wild. "You want to be the one who calls the shots? Then be sturdy without this old man's lies." She slammed the watch onto the marble floor with every ounce of her strength. The glass shattered with a sound like a gunshot. The golden gears, delicate, intricate, and honest, spilled out across the floor like tiny broken teeth. The silence that followed was measured in heartbeats. I looked down at the shattered remains of my only memento. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I felt a coldness wash over me that was more absolute than any anger. I realized then that you cannot fix a foundation that was built to be broken. At 10:32 a.m., 3 sharp, rhythmic knocks echoed through the house. Oswald opened the oak door with a trembling hand. It wasn't Stellan. It was a man in a charcoal suit, holding a blue-backed legal folder. He didn't look at Myra's pearls or the grand staircase. He looked at the data. "Myra Vane?" the man asked. Myra straightened her silk blouse. Her voice regained its haughty edge. "Who are you? We're in the middle of a family matter." The man didn't answer. He handed her the folder. I watched Myra's eyes drop to the top line of the court docket, the identity collision that would finally end the story she had written for me. Kaelen Vane versus Myra Vane, Federal Identity Theft and Fraud Recovery Action. Myra looked at the blue folder, then her eyes drifted to my waist. She saw the heavy leather belt and the silver federal badge I had clipped there, the symbol of the authority she had always mocked. For 3 seconds, the house was so still I could hear the gears of the broken watch settling into the marble cracks. Her hands began to shake, the paper rattling in the silence. I didn't offer a hug or a way out. I knelt, picked up the empty brass watch case, and stood back up. "At that event, facts will speak," I said, my voice as calm as the ocean before a storm. "I am no longer your safety net, and I am no longer your daughter. I am your auditor." I walked past her, picked up my 4 boxes, and left the Back Bay house for the last time. The door closed behind me with a soft, final click. I didn't look back. I had spent 30 years trying to be enough for them. Now I only needed to be enough for the truth. Monday, 11:45 p.m. The air in my home office tasted of hot toner and ozone. The low, rhythmic hum of a heavy-duty laser printer was the only heartbeat in the room. I sat at my desk, surrounded by a white sea of paper, 522 pages to be exact. I wasn't crying, I was sorting. For an investigator, there is a specific type of solace in the physical organization of evidence. It is the process of turning chaos into a chronology, transforming a lifetime of gaslighting into a series of indisputable data points. I worked with a mechanical focus. Click, snap. Another 3-ring binder closed. I smoothed down the red plastic divider tabs, labeling them with clinical precision. Exhibit A, fraudulent account opening, 2006. Exhibit B, trace disbursements. Exhibit C, unauthorized SSN usage. My hands trembled only once, when I stapled a bank signature card from 20 years ago. The handwriting wasn't mine. It was Myra's, back when she still believed I would never grow old enough to look closely at the ink. In the world of federal fraud, we call this an audit trail. It is a weapon made of wood pulp and logic. I wasn't preparing this folder to win an argument. I was preparing it to ensure that the truth couldn't be redacted by a mother who treated reality like a rough draft. Stellan entered the room at midnight, carrying 2 mugs of black coffee. He set one down and leaned over the final binder, his eyes scanning a specific page. He didn't offer a platitude. He just tapped a number at the bottom of a spreadsheet. $250,000, Kaelen, he said, his voice a low, gravelly rasp that felt like a steadying hand. They stole $250,412.18 from your future and then sat at your wedding dinner. Or didn't. and called you a financial burden. You have the record now. Let the paper do the talking. I didn't answer. I just looked at the stack of binders. I realized then that I had spent my life trying to be the good daughter by covering their deficits. Now I was going to be the auditor who finally closed the account. The first counterattack arrived at 10:15 the next morning in the form of a text message from my cousin, Elena. It was a screenshot of a group email Myra had sent to the entire extended Vane family. "Dear family," it read, "it is with a heavy heart that I share that Kaelen has suffered a complete mental breakdown since the wedding. She is confused about her finances and her memories. She has begun making erratic threats against the family peace. We ask for your prayers, and for her own sake, please do not engage with her delusions." Minutes later, a direct message from Myra lit up my screen. "If you bring these lies to light, Kaelen Vane, I will notify the federal board that you are unstable. I will destroy your career and your husband's reputation before the week is out. Choose wisely. You are not strong enough for this arena." I looked at the text, then at the heavy black binder on my desk. They were trying to discredit the witness before I could ever take the stand. It was a classic move, but they had forgotten that an investigator doesn't rely on being believed. An investigator relies on being verified. The Vane Family Legacy Gala at the Harvard Club was an exercise in old-world suffocation. High vaulted ceilings, the sharp smell of gin and aged mahogany, and a string quartet playing in the corner to mask the sound of social maneuvering. It was a room full of pearls, silk, and judgment. This was Myra's arena, the place where image was the only currency that mattered. I entered in a charcoal gray suit, my posture as straight as a ledger line. Stellan was a silent, towering presence beside me, his hand resting lightly on the small of my back. I carried the heavy black binder under my arm. As we moved through the foyer, the temperature of the room seemed to drop. The relatives I had known since childhood looked at me with a mixture of pity and suspicion, their eyes darting away the moment I made eye contact. Myra approached us within minutes, a glass of champagne in one hand and a practiced, tragic smile on her face. She looked radiant, every hair in place, a portrait of a mother grieving for a broken child. "Kaelen, dear," she said, her voice dripping with artificial honey. "You look tired. Are you feeling better? We've all been so worried about your recent episode. Perhaps you should go home and rest. This is a family celebration. It's no place for your confusion." I didn't blink. I didn't reach for her hand. I looked her directly in the eyes and used the only name she had earned. "I'm fine, Mrs. Vane. The data is even better. I'm not here to rest. I'm here for the record." I saw the mask flicker, a split second of genuine fear in her eyes before she smoothed it over with a laugh. She turned to a group of aunts nearby, her voice rising just enough to be heard. "It's so heartbreaking. Ever since the accident, she's been so dramatic, confused about her own name almost. We're just hoping she gets the help she needs." The aunts nodded, their faces tight with pity. I felt the burn in my chest, the familiar urge to scream that I wasn't the one who was broken. But I gripped the binder tighter. I reminded myself that facts don't need volume. Across the room, I saw Stellan's father. He was a man of immense presence, a figure of absolute judicial authority who had spent his life in courtrooms far more intimidating than this ballroom. He caught my eye. He looked at the binder under my arm, then at the badge clipped to my belt. He gave a single, nearly invisible nod of his head. "Go." The gala host stepped up to the microphone at the front of the ballroom to begin the traditional family toast. The room went quiet, 30 pairs of eyes turning toward the stage. But before the host could speak, Myra slid forward. She moved with the grace of a predator, her hand reaching out to grasp the microphone stand. "Before we toast to the Vane legacy," Myra said, her voice amplified and clear, "there is something the family should know about Kaelen's recent choices. As many of you have sensed, she has been struggling." She looked directly at me, a triumphant, cruel glint in her eyes, her fingers tightening on the mic. She was going to execute the final smear in front of everyone I had ever known. The Moakley Federal Courthouse sits on the edge of the Boston Harbor, a massive structure of brick and glass that feels like it was designed to make individual secrets feel very small. Inside, the air was cold, carrying the faint scent of floor wax and the weight of decades of legal transcripts. It was a Thursday morning, the gray Atlantic visible through the high windows of the fourth-floor chamber. Myra and Valora sat at the defense table, both dressed in coordinated morning navy suits. They looked less like defendants in a fraud hearing and more like tragic figures attending a funeral, performing for the gallery of extended family members who had filled the pews behind them. I sat at the plaintiff's table. I didn't look at the cousins who had blocked my number. I didn't acknowledge the aunts who had whispered about my instability. I simply adjusted my glasses and watched the court reporter's fingers move over the stenotype machine. Silence is a peculiar thing in a courtroom. It isn't the absence of noise, but the accumulation of tension. Myra was given the floor for her opening statement regarding the 2006 debt. She leaned into the microphone, her voice regaining that melodic, practiced poise. "Your Honor, this is a deeply painful family matter," Myra began, her eyes glistening for the gallery. "My daughter, Kaelen, has always been troubled. She had expensive tastes she couldn't afford on a civil servant's salary. We only stepped in back in 2006 to manage the debt she created. We are the victims of her erratic choices, and it breaks my heart to see her being manipulated now by outsiders who see our legacy as a meal ticket." She swung her arm towards Stellan, a gesture more insulting than a slap. I sat motionless. I didn't sigh. I didn't protest. I let the silence in the room grow heavy, watching the court clerk transcribe every word of the story Myra was fabricating. She truly believed she was still in control of the case. She thought Vane's image was more powerful than a federal audit. The double doors at the back of the chamber opened with a muffled thud. A man in a bespoke charcoal suit walked in. Chief Justice Julian St. James. He didn't sit in the gallery. He walked straight to our table and placed a steady hand on Stellan's shoulder. The presiding judge on the bench paused, his expression shifting from neutral to deferential. "Good morning, Chief Justice," the judge said. "I see your son has finally brought his wife to meet the court." The room went ashen. I watched the color drain from Myra's face, starting at her hairline and moving down to her throat. Stellan wasn't just the man she had tried to erase with a racist slur. He was the heir to the most powerful legal dynasty in the Northeast. Her old money facade was suddenly standing in the shadow of a mountain. I stood up. I didn't use a speech. I didn't use emotion. I used the projector. "I am not here to argue feelings, Your Honor," I said, my voice a steady flatline. "I am here to present the audit trail." I clicked the remote. The first slide appeared on the wall in 40-point font. June 2006, loan hash 4,492. Amount, $50,000. Recipient, Myra Vane. Collateral, Kaelen Vane's social security number. July 2006, disbursement. Amount, $12,000. Recipient, Valora Vane. Memo, modeling portfolio Milan. August 2006, mortgage payment for Back Bay Victorian. Amount, $4,000. Source, stolen credit line. I moved through the years with mechanical precision. Each slide was a hammer blow. I showed the digital fingerprints, the main bank records Myra thought were buried, and the forged signatures that matched her own handwriting perfectly. The gallery was so silent I could hear the rhythmic click-snap of the projector remote. Then I projected the final piece of evidence. It was the text message Myra had sent me when I asked for her help before the seizure. "Don't ask about the statements, Kaelen. You're too stupid to understand finance anyway. Scene 8:15 a.m. The emoji looked monstrous on the 10-foot screen. It was the social sentence Myra had written for herself. I turned to face the gallery. Then I looked directly at Myra. I spoke only once. "I didn't come here to win an argument, Myra," I said, my voice barely above a whisper but filling every corner of the room. "I came here to close an account. For 30 years I was the ghost in your machine, the person who paid for your prestige with my own identity. You didn't hate my husband's race. You hated that his family's integrity meant you could no longer hide your crimes. Our business is concluded. If you want a daughter, you'll have to find someone you didn't try to bankrupt." "That's the boundary," I added, the words sounding like a door locking. The reaction was immediate and physical. The aunts and cousins who had sat near Myra began to stand up. They didn't speak. They simply moved away from her table, creating a visible void around her as if her dishonesty was contagious. No one looked at her. They looked at the floor, Myra tried to reach for an aunt's sleeve, but the woman pulled back, her face a mask of cold realization. I picked up my black binder and felt Stellan take my hand. Behind us, I heard the metallic clack of a fountain pen hitting the mahogany desk as the judge signed the order for a criminal referral for identity theft. I didn't turn around to see the handcuffs. I didn't need to. The room was silent. I could finally hear my own breathing. The hallway of the Moakley Federal Courthouse was vast, a cavern of cold marble and echoing silence. As the heavy mahogany doors of the chamber swung shut behind me, there were no cheers. No one rushed forward to hug me. There was only a profound, hollow stillness that felt like the air rushing back into a vacuum. I stood there for a long moment, listening to the distant, rhythmic click of heels on the floor and the muffled voices of clerks in the distance. Myra was led away through a side door for processing. She didn't look back. Her face was no longer a mask of aristocratic rage. It was the aging, confused shadow of a woman who had finally run out of narratives to spin. I watched the relatives who had once been her loyal audience walk past me with downcast eyes. They didn't apologize. Shame is rarely that loud. But they no longer stood near Valora. My sister sat on a wooden bench alone, staring into her empty Hermes bag as if it might offer her a way out. The Vane family prestige hadn't exploded with a bang. It had simply evaporated, leaving behind the cold reality of a ledger that didn't balance. 3 weeks later, my phone vibrated in the stillness of my new office. A voicemail from the detention center. I pressed play, hearing Myra's voice. Thin, brittle, and entirely unchanged. "How could you do this to your own blood, Kaelen?" she gasped. "You've made us a laughingstock. You've destroyed your sister's future just to prove a point. I hope you're happy with your truth." I didn't hit play twice. I didn't formulate a rebuttal or wonder how she could still be so blind. I simply deleted the message. I didn't owe her an explanation for the story she had written with her own hand. That afternoon, I walked down to the pier. The salt air of the Boston harbor was sharp and clean, filling my lungs with a clarity I hadn't known since I was a child. I watched the tide pull back from the rusted pilings and realized that I had spent 30 years trying to audit my way into their hearts. I finally understood that the only person whose signature matters on my life's ledger is mine. I returned home and opened a small wooden box on my desk. Inside was my grandfather's watch. The glass had been replaced, the brass polished, and the intricate golden gears were humming once more with a rhythmic, honest tick. It was a quiet sound, but it was steady. I didn't put it in a safe. I left it out, where I could hear the time passing. Honestly, I logged into my accounts one last time and made a final transfer. I moved the last of the family fund into a secure college trust for a niece I haven't met yet. A gift she'll receive when she's 18, one that her parents can't touch. I closed the browser tab. The audit was complete. I looked at Stellan, who was waiting by the door with 2 coats and a quiet smile. I realized then that justice isn't about making them see the light. It's about making sure you aren't blinded by their darkness. If you are currently carrying a debt that isn't yours, emotional, financial, or ancestral, know that you have the right to put it down. You don't need their permission to be free. The world won't collapse when you stop holding up their lies. It will simply start turning in a different, better direction.